November 1942. A German Fieseler skims the thermals over the western desert, south of El Alamein. Through crystal air and Zeiss 10 WWII 50s, the pilot sees exactly what he expects. 20 kilometers of soft skin, Bedfords, lorries, 3-tonners, parked in regulated rows. He notes the grid, radios HQ, and recommends saving the artillery for something worthy. Supply parks burn. You don't waste shells on them. 3 hours later, those lorries shrug their skins, and a surge of Crusaders, Grants, and Shermans roars forward from the mirage. The depot was a fist. The trucks were tanks, and the Germans had just misread the battlefield again. The British called the disguise a Sunshield, a collapsible wooden frame skinned in Hessian, draped over a 27-ton tank to impersonate a 3-ton truck. On paper, it bordered on farce. Up close, it looked like a stage prop, but at 3,000 feet, through desert shimmer, against the brain's need to pattern match in a split second, it turned the most valuable pieces on the board invisible. This wasn't a one-off stunt. From Operation Crusader, Nov, 1941, through the final chase into Tunisia, May 1943. Sunshields were not a gimmick, they were standard operating procedure. The trick worked because it aimed not at German pride, but at German process. Why hiding in plain sight? Worked by 1941, everyone knew the rules of the open desert. Camouflage manuals said, find defilade, disperse 100 meters between vehicles, keep still under observation. The Luftwaffe ran tight reconnaissance cycles. The Storch loitered for hours. Analysts compared photographs day by day. In theory, tanks squatting behind wadis might survive. In practice, there are almost no trees in a billiard table. The western desert offers height without concealment and distance without cover. German observers were good. They recognized armor parks from track geometry, blast rings, and lagar patterns. They'd mapped the coastal plain from 1941 onward, flying the same routes until they could spot a new tire print at 3,000 feet. After battle acts, their intel summaries were smug for a reason. They'd been right, repeatedly. So Britain stopped trying to hide tanks as tanks and hid them as trucks. The device that shouldn't have worked, Sunshield MK-BY, from Letalcol Jasper Maskelyne's camouflage team, refined by Royal Engineers, was brutally simple. A rectangular frame, C21x8x7, bolted to 4 posts on hull and turret, the exact silhouette of a Bedford QL 3-tonner. Hessian cloth, sand-painted and waterproofed so dawn dew didn't turn it translucent. Painted illusions, cab windows in black rectangles, vertical stakes for the cargo bed, even shadow bars under the chassis for ground clearance. Side aprons cut to conceal the track run above 15-degree viewing angles, the exact zone of most aerial looks. A quick-release rig, 4 thumb screws and catches, so crews could dump the frame in under 3 minutes. Doctrine B1's target, 230, and charge. Weight penalty, about 200 pounds. Psychological penalty, substantial. Crews hated losing peripheral vision and hated looking ridiculous. Squadron diaries grumbled about circus wagons. Commanders worried the moment of discard would be the moment of death. Then Crusader proved it. First Blood, Operation Crusader, Nov, 1941. On 18th and 19th of November, Afrika Korps staged the 7th Armored Division south of the Omars. For 3 days, tanks slipped in at night under sunshields and behaved like logistics. Small periodic moves, tent lines in neat rows, cooking fires where supply units put them. Luftwaffe flights at dawn and noon ticked the sites as probable supply concentration with light AT cover. German intel put the British armor 15 miles north. At first light on the 19th, more than 300 British tanks lifted their skins and smashed from the depots. The Ariete Division had sighted its M1340s and Semoventi to meet a northern attack. The blow came from the southeast. In 4 hours, Ariete lost 34 tanks destroyed, 23 damaged. 7th Armored lost 8. The next day, German pilots dutifully reported lorries retreating south from the same points, tanks rearming under disguise, misread again as a logistics withdrawal. A captured intel officer wrote, exasperated, "Enemy tanks appear and disappear with no corresponding movements in our reconnaissance logs." It wasn't magic. It was cognition. The British weren't making a perfect model. They were hitting the observer's template. The physics of perception. At 3,000 ft altitude and a 45-degree slant range, desert air heated to 40 degrees Celsius wobbles the world. The eye, under best conditions, resolves about 1 arc-minute. Call it 1.22 feet at that range. A tank's track width, now on 15 inches, melts into the shimmer. Painted cab windows and bedstakes at 18 to 24 inches stay above threshold. Through midday haze, a rectangular top and clean aprons say, lorry. Add context, a known depot, radio traffic from supply units, harassing fire calibrated to defensive positions, and the observer's brain stops interrogating and starts categorizing. The job of recon is not to doubt everything. It's to classify enough. The Sunshield didn't have to fool a man studying a single vehicle for 30 minutes under laboratory light. It had to pass a 3-second scan from a pilot flying a timed route, or a 10-second sweep from a forward observer busy with fall of shot, own troop movements, and counter-recon. The British weren't betting on gullibility. They were betting on human bandwidth. From trick to system, deception as a weapon. By late 1942, British deception wasn't accessory. It was doctrine. Major David Strangeways and Lieutenant Colonel Charles Richardson built full-spectrum illusions. Wireless deception, fake nets chattering in the wrong sectors, dummy artillery, carefully timed harassing fire to imply guns where there were none, supply trails, empty lorries grinding tracks between, real and dummy dumps, cannibals, reverse sunshields that turned actual lorries into tanks to pad counts, inflatables and canvas tanks, crude but convincing at altitude. Crucially, these weren't lies competing with reality. They were true things moved in time and space. Real supplies, real radio nets, real tank brigades, just not where German analysts concluded they were. The masterpiece, Operation Bertram, 2nd Alamein, Oct. 1942. The problem, shift roughly 300 tanks from the southern sector to the north and make Rommel believe the opposite. The choreography was military ballet. 26 Oct. Pont Nove. Each night, Oct 50 tanks rolled north, row 200, 500 under blackout, arriving before dawn, instantly sun-shielded. Dawn and midday, Luftwaffe cycles saw soft skin concentrations grow in the north. In the south, actual lorries donned cannibal frames, plywood silhouettes with dummy guns, to preserve the image of a heavy armored mass. Movement timings hugged German habit. Reconnaissance at 700 and 1200, no visible change between cycles. Captured Panzer Army. Africa summaries from those dates put T-280 tanks in the south and 250 soft skins in the north. The real picture was inverted. At 2140, 23 October, artillery opened Lightfoot and X-Corps advanced. Crews blew catches, sunshields collapsed, armor surged. 15. Panzerstaff, waiting south, got the redeploy order over an hour late. The first defensive belt cracked before the countermass could form. Primitive but effective German tech teams eventually recovered intact sunshields from knocked-out tanks. Reports in early 1942 called them primitive but effective beyond 2 km under desert conditions and recommended lower altitude passes, off-cycle flights, and ground agent verification. On paper, that's right. In practice, the Luftwaffe in Africa was short of fuel, aircraft, and time. Reconnaissance competed with fighter cover and close air support. Flying lower meant losses to light AA. Pushing more sorties meant fewer bombs on depots and gun lines. Ground recce across 50 miles of rear area demanded operations of its own. Doctrine, aggressive probing to force contact, couldn't touch a tank park 40 miles behind the front without spoiling an offensive elsewhere. The Sunshield exploited not stupidity, but constraints. Life under canvas. This was guerrilla armor. Flight Lieutenant Tom Neal remembered arriving at a satellite field. A windsock, 2 petrol Bowsers under a tree, nothing else. Pilots slept in requisitioned farmhouses. Tank crews lived in bell tents, washed in streams, and sat under wings or under canvas roofs, waiting for the scramble phone to ring. At Goodwood House, Polish pilots of 145 Squadron slept beneath oil paintings, walked across a lawn to hurricanes hidden under trees, flew a mission over the Channel, then ate off fine china before the next scramble. Surreal, but operational. Ground crews were the miracle. 3 men, a canvas tent, a handful of tools. Patching cannon strikes with fabric and dope by moonlight. 8-minute turnarounds. Start refuel before the pilot unstraps. Armorers slam Brownings full while fuel flows. Pilot signs off checks and is airborne to hit the same bomber stream on the way home. The Sunshield's genius only mattered because tempo made it feel like the RAF and 8th Army never ran out of teeth. Numbers, cost, and consequence. From late 1941 to spring 1943, British shops made 1,400 Sunshields and trained crews across 7 armoured divisions. Unit cost, about 12 bores, timber, Hessian, paint, fittings, and roughly 4 man-hours to build. Compare that to the price of losing surprise. Pre-registered artillery and Stuka strikes into a static armour park. Countermasses forming on the correct axis. The first blow blunted by a map. On 15 September 1940, Battle of Britain Day, aerial context, the RAF's distributed fields made German math collapse. In the desert, Sunshields did the same, a force multiplier of ambiguity. When 21, Panzer deployed south to meet the main thrust indicated by cannibal counts, the real thrust hit from the north. On 4th of November 1942, their diary notes, enemy armor appeared in overwhelming strength from sectors previously identified as supply concentration, casualties significant. Not because British tanks were categorically better. Panzer III-4 vs. Crusader, Sark Grant was a wash, but because intelligence put steel in the wrong place. Psychology compounded it. Once German staffs realized they'd been systematically deceived, they hesitated. Recon crews were told to fly lower. Losses tripled, Nov 42 Jan 43. Analysts hedged assessments, commanders delayed. The uncertainty was as lethal as any AP round. Why the Germans never fixed it? They knew the vulnerability. They wrote it down. They couldn't pay the bill. Fuel and aircraft, not enough for lower, longer off-cycle recce. AA threat. Low passes bled scarce crews and frames. Doctrinal reliance. Air photos replaced ground probes across 40-50 miles of emptiness. Competing priorities. Shore bombardments, gun line spotting, port strikes, every sortie a trade. Cognitive limits. Even perfect analysts must bucket reality. The British turned bucketing against them. The recommendation, conduct more thorough reconnaissance, is tactically correct and strategically useless when your logistics say no. The lesson that outlived the canvas. Sunshield stayed in service through May 1943. U.S. units adapted them for M3 Grants and M4 Shermans. Post-war, both sides admitted the obvious. This was one of the cheapest, highest leverage inventions of the North African campaign. More important than the timber and paint was the mindset. Treat deception like artillery, planned, resourced, rehearsed, measured. The genius wasn't the frame. It was the integration, wireless, dummies, supply choreography, artillery timings, stacked to tell one coherent lie that was 80% made of truth. And it was the humility to design for how the enemy actually sees, not how you wish they would. On 2nd November 1942, a German pilot did his job. He saw Bedfords where Bedfords should be, behaving as Bedfords do. He filed a correct report for the wrong world. 3 hours later, the canvas fell away, and the wrong world killed him. Sometimes the most ridiculous ideas, making tanks into trucks, become the deadliest advantages when you aim them at perception, not metal. In the Western Desert, ambiguity was armor, and Britain manufactured it by the acre.